Hey, I'm Matt Higgs and I'm normally a music photographer, but as you can tell, I'm not in a music venue today. I'm shooting something slightly different, which is wildlife here in the Exmor National Park. Now, OM System have lent me a series of their more telephoto lenses to try out, and I'm really excited, given this is a system that I've not used for a few years, to see how they stand up in this environment. So you're probably wondering, well, what lenses have I been given? And there's 4 of them. The first is this, the 40 to 150mm f2.8 Pro lens. Then I've got the digital ED IS 100 to 400mm f5 to 6.3 lens, the 150mm to 600mm IS f5 to 6.3 lens, and the 300mm f4 IS Pro prime lens. Now, some of those focal lengths might not sound that long and perhaps not even suitable for wildlife photography, but one thing to bear in mind is that they're being fitted to a micro four thirds camera, and this has a 2x crop. So for instance, this 40 to 150mm f2.8 lens is going to operate much closer to what you might expect from an 80 to 300mm f5.6 full frame lens, and that's going to apply to all the lenses that we're using today. Now, alongside the lenses, OM Systems have also given me a couple of teleconverters to play with, so I just wanted to talk about them a little bit. I've got the MC20, which is a 2x teleconverter, and an MC14, which is a 1.4x teleconverter. For anyone who's not familiar with what a teleconverter is and does, it's a secondary lens mount that sits between a camera and lens, which enlarges the central part of the image that is obtained by the sensor. In the case of the 2x, this doubles the apparent focal length, while with the 1.4x, it increases it by 1.4x. This would make our 300mm lens effectively a 600mm with the 2x, or 420mm in the case of the 1.4x. With both converters costing a few £100s, this gives affordable flexibility to get more reach from a lens without having to purchase a whole new one. But there is a trade-off in that the effective f-stop of a lens is narrowed by 1 stop in the case of the 1.4x and 2 in the 2x converter, meaning a greater depth of field, which might not always be desirable, and reduced light is collected. So one thing that I just wanted to point out is that all of these lenses are capable of close to macro images. So if you see a static subject that you want to get some more detailed shots of, that's completely possible with every single one of these optics. Now, one thought I've had as I've been wandering around here is that I've got 4 lenses in my bag that are all capable of a full frame equivalent focal length of 300mm or greater, and they're not weighing a ton. I'm walking around, I've spent the last few hours wandering around here, and I feel fine, and I don't think I've ever been able to do that with a system before. Now, why would you want to? That's a fair question, but it does illustrate just how light and compact these lenses are. So I've currently got on the 150 to 600mm f5 to 6.3 lens, and this probably has the widest range out of the 4 lenses I've got in terms of its focal lengths. It goes 300mm equivalent up to a simply huge 1200mm equivalent if this was a full frame lens. Although, mentioning full frame lenses, this is probably where this lens has its slight drawback, because it is the bulkiest out of all 4 lenses, and if you were looking to use this system as a lightweight replacement to, say, a DSLR one, it's probably where it's going to fall slightly short. It's a great lens, seems to be pretty sharp across that range, but it isn't the most compact. Now, one really nice thing about this 150 to 600mm lens is that it offers 7 stops of image stabilization at its wide end and 6 stops at its telephoto end. And when you're shooting 600mm or 1200mm full frame equivalent images, every little bounce of your hand has the potential to be dramatic and create blur in your images. But with this stabilization, handheld shooting is a real possibility, even on a slightly overcast day like this, and that is really impressive. This lens has a 21 element in 15 group construction, and one feature that I really like is this side switch. You can lock the lens to stop the barrel from creeping out when not in use. You can set it to an option with drag so that you can really fine tune your composition as you extend the barrel, or you can set it to the third option, which is going to allow you to be responsive as it quickly pushes the lens out and back in. I've just got to the highest point in Exmor, and this seemed like a good spot to take a bit of a break and talk about the lens that I've got attached at the minute, which is the 300mm f4 prime. It's the only prime lens out of the 4 lenses I've been given. All the others are zooms, and that comes with its own pros and its own cons. Now, one of the benefits of it being a prime, or at least with this lens anyway, is that it is tack sharp. As I've been walking around and taking shots, I've been checking them on the back of the screen. I can zoom in for miles with this. It looks nice and crisp, nice and clear, and that means that if I choose to crop my images later on, they're still going to look great. They're not going to start breaking up. You're not going to see those soft edges. It's going to look tack sharp. The negative is that obviously it's a fixed focal length. So if I want to get closer or further away from a subject, I've got to physically move myself. This lens has no flexibility for that. It is, however, because it's f4 and still a relatively fast lens, compatible with a 1.4 times and the 2 times teleconverter, which is going to give me a lot more reach, but at the expense of a little bit of that light. So this 300mm f4 Pro lens has a 17 element in 10 group construction and weighs in at 1,475 grams. It's splash, freeze and water resistant. Its collar snaps between manual and automatic focus, and its image stabilization system works in collaboration with the in-camera image stabilization system. So the lens that I'm using at the moment is the most affordable one that we've been given, and that's the 100 to 400 f5 to 6.3 zoom. Now, at 400mm, that's an 800mm equivalent, so we've still got lots of reach with this lens. But the slight drawback is probably the aperture on this lens. f5 to 6.3, it's not quite as fast as some of the others, so, you know, once the light starts dropping a little bit, it's probably not going to fare as well as, say, the 2.8 or even the f4. But the really great thing about this lens is its affordability. It's less than half the price of some of the other lenses that we're looking at. So if you're a new photographer or you're just discovering your passion for wildlife photography, it's a great lens to build your skills with, but really not have to push that boat out when it comes to purchasing it. The 100 to 400mm f5 to 6.3 lens has 21 elements in 15 groups and weighs in at 1,120 grams, so reasonably compact as well. This lens is also dust, freeze and splash resistant and features 3 switches on its side, one for switching between autofocus and manual focus, one for limiting its focus range, and one for turning on or turning off its in-lens stabilization. And that lens stabilization, interestingly, works independently of the one that is in the body. So I'm just having a wander around, and I've got the 40-150 on at the moment, and it's quite a nice flexible lens for walking around with. At the shorter end, it's almost a standard lens, not quite, while obviously, you know, at 150 it's quite telephoto on this camera. And with the f2.8 aperture that it has across its range, it's really nice for breaking up subjects against the background and getting that professional looking background blur. I've just spotted some mushrooms and it's working really nicely for these. The 40 to 150mm f2.8 Pro lens has a 16 element in 10 group construction and weighs in at 760 grams, so it really is quite compact. Its zoom is internal, so there's no extension of the barrel at any point, and it is both dust, freeze and splash resistant. And much like the 300mm prime, its lens hood can be extended and retracted without having to place it on or off the lens, and it features a lens function button on its side. So I'm just coming to the end of my couple of days here in Exmor with the OM system lenses that I've been given, and I'm not really going to draw any overall verdict about which lens is best or anything like that, because I think they're very different lenses for very different people, so I thought it'd be more useful to talk about who I think each lens might be suitable for. So the first lens that I had was the 40 to 150mm f2.8 Pro lens, and I think that lens is going to be a great pairing for people that already have a nice kit lens but just want a bit more reach and want to start shooting things like sport or wildlife. You know, you've got 300mm on that long ends, but you've still got a nice fast f2.8 aperture. It doesn't have inbuilt stabilisation, but because it's the slightly wider lens with the in-body stabilisation, you're probably going to be fine in most situations anyway. It's really nicely built and sharpness is great. So the second lens we had was that 300mm f4 prime lens, and if you're taking your wildlife photography or perhaps even sports a little bit more seriously, it's going to deliver probably the crispest results out of all the four options that we looked at. The sharpness was fantastic, and that's going to give you lots of options for cropping into your image or blowing them up into great big sizes, and the quality is really going to shine. Obviously, you lose the flexibility that you get with a zoom, but because of that fast aperture, you can still pair it with the 1.4 or 2 times teleconverter and get some really great results. So the third option we were given was the 100 to 400mm f5 to 6.3 lens, and it's our affordable choice. If you have an interest in wildlife photography, but you don't really want to push the boat out that far at the moment, it could be a really great starting point to develop your skills with before you move on to bigger and more expensive things at a later date. So our final choice is the 150mm to 600mm f5 to 6.3 zoom, and what a fantastic lens that is. You know, 600mm on a full frame equivalent body, that would be 1200mm of reach. You can pick off subjects that are fields away. Coupled with the fact it's got that fantastic in-lens stabilisation system, 7 stops at its widest, 6 at its most telephoto, you can handheld shoot this lens and still get nice, crisp, clear results. This is a really solid lens choice for wildlife photography and those people that are starting to take it a little bit more seriously. Now, if there's one thing that I've kind of realised spending a couple of days with these lenses, it's that whatever your budget, there's going to be a really solid wildlife photography option out there for you from OM Systems. So I'm going to go take a walk now and see what else I can find. But thank you for watching.